Hello 8th graders and happy Monday. Today we're going to finish talking about congruent figures and look at what happens with corresponding sides and angles. We're going to use our knowledge of congruent figures to find missing sides and angles. Let's get started. Look at number 1. The figures in number 1 are congruent. Which transformation maps PRQ onto P'R'Q'? That's a translation. The shape has simply moved. The figures in number 2 are congruent. Which transformation maps UVW onto U'V', That's a reflection. Look at number 3. Those figures are also congruent. Which transformation maps ABC onto A'B', That's a rotation. Now let's look at number 4. Find the missing angle. I know that all of those angles are on a straight line, so they all add up to 180. I need to add 30 plus 115 first. What's 30 plus 115? It's 145. Now I can subtract 145 from 180 to find my missing angle. What's 180 minus 145? It's 35. X is 35 degrees. Now you try one. What's the missing angle in number 5? The missing angle is 48 degrees. First I would need to add 52, 57, and 23. When I do that, I get 132. Then I can subtract from 180 to find the missing angle. 180 minus 132 is 48 degrees. Now let's find the missing angle in a triangle. What is angle U? Well, the angles in a triangle add up to 180 degrees. So I can add 50 plus 35. What's that? It's 85. Then I can subtract from 180 to find the missing angle. What's 180 minus 85? It's 95. Angle U is 95 degrees. Now you try one. In number 7, what is angle Q? Angle Q is 30 degrees. 65 plus 85 is 150. And 180 minus 150 is 30. Now let's look at parallel lines and transversals to find some missing angles. First, what's the relationship between 41 degrees and X? Those are same side exterior angles. So they are supplementary, or they add up to 180. I can subtract 180 minus 41 to find the value of X. What's the value of X? X is 139 degrees. Now you try one. Find the value of the unknown angle. What is X in this example? Here, X is 106 degrees. These are also same side exterior angles, so they're supplementary. I can subtract 180 minus 74 to find the missing angle. The missing angle is 106 degrees. Today we are going to talk again about congruent figures. Congruent figures are two shapes that have the same sides and the same angles. They're the same size and the same shape. Two shapes are congruent if they can be mapped onto one another using rigid transformations. Remember that rigid transformations are translations, rotations, or reflections. If you can move one shape on top of another using translations, reflections, or rotations and they match, the two shapes are congruent. Let's look at a first example of finding missing sides. Figure ABC is congruent to figure HGF. HGF is the result of a rotation of ABC. So I can see ABC rotated clockwise. Now, what is the measure of angle A? At first, I need to figure out which angle corresponds to angle A. Which angle in HGF corresponds to angle A? Angle H corresponds to angle A. So, I know that the angle measure of A is the exact same as the angle measure of H. So what's the measure of angle A? It's 63 degrees. What's the angle measure of angle B? First, which angle corresponds to angle B? Angle G corresponds to angle B. When I rotated the figure, angle B ended up on top in the same spot as G. So what's the angle measure for angle B? It's 80 degrees. What's the measure of angle C? First, which angle corresponds to C? F corresponds to C. So what's the measure of angle C? It's 37 degrees. What is the length of segment GF? So I need to find which line segment corresponds to GF. Which line segment corresponds to GF? BC corresponds to GF, the line segment that runs between the 80-degree angle and the 37-degree angle. So what's the measure of GF? It's 50 yards. I can use corresponding sides and angles to find missing sides and angles in congruent figures. Let's look at one more example. Triangle BCD is congruent to triangle TRS. TRS is the result of a rotation of BCD. What is the angle measure for angle T? Well, which angle does T correspond to? T corresponds to angle B. So what's the measure of angle T? It's 61 degrees. What's the measure of angle S? Which angle does S correspond to? S corresponds to D. So what's the measure? It's 80 degrees. What's the measure of angle R? Angle R corresponds to which angle? Angle R corresponds to angle C. So what's its measure? It's 39 degrees. What is the measure of line segment DB? First, which side of TRS does DB correspond to? DB corresponds to ST. So what's the measure of DB? It's 50 miles. Now try one on your own. What is angle Y? Well, angle Y corresponds to angle H, so it's 35 degrees. What is the length of GH? GH corresponds to XY, so it's 71 feet. What is the length of FG? FG corresponds to WX, so it's 50 feet. What is the length of HF? HF corresponds to YW, so it's 87 feet. Let's try a few more. These two shapes are congruent. What is the angle measure for angle V? Angle V corresponds to Q, so it's 63 degrees. What is the measure of side QR? QR corresponds to VW, so it's 48 miles. What is the measure of PQ? PQ corresponds to UX, so its measure is 31 miles. What is the measure of angle X? Angle X corresponds to angle O, so its measure is 125 degrees. These two figures are congruent. What is the measure of angle K? Angle K corresponds to angle V. It's worth 59 degrees. What is the measure of angle U? It's worth 77 degrees. It corresponds to angle I. What is the measure of side IK? IK corresponds to UV, so it's 50 millimeters. What is the measure of IJ? IJ corresponds to UW, so it's 62 millimeters. Now try one where more of the sides and angles are missing. These two figures are congruent. What is the measure of LK? LK corresponds to TS. The measure is 38 miles. What is the measure of UT? UT corresponds to ML. The measure is 48 miles. What is the measure of MN? MN corresponds to UR. The measure is 14 miles. What is the measure of angle N? Angle N corresponds to angle R. It's worth 127 degrees. What is the measure of angle K? Angle K corresponds to angle S. The measure is 78 degrees. QRS is the result of a rotation of LNM. These two figures are congruent. Let's visualize the rotation. If I rotated point N clockwise, it would correspond with point S. Point L would correspond with point Q, and point M corresponds with point R. So, let's fill in some of the missing sides and angles. If R corresponds to M, then R is worth how many degrees? R is 43 degrees. If N corresponds to S, then how many degrees is angle S? It's 76 degrees. If Q corresponds to L, how many degrees is angle Q? It's 61 degrees. Now that I have the angles labeled, it's easier for me to find my sides. What is the length of QS? Well, what's the length of the side between the 61 and the 76 degree angle? It's 35 centimeters. What is the length of SR? Well, what is the length of the side between the 76 and 43 degree angles? It's 45 centimeters. What is the length of RQ? What is the length of the side between the 43 and 61 degree angles? It's 50 centimeters. Try one last pair of congruent figures. What is the side length of YV? The side length of YV is 26 centimeters. What is angle X? Angle X corresponds to angle P. It's 111 degrees. What is PS? PS is 13 centimeters. These shapes were transformed through a reflection and then a translation. You've done a great job with this video. Now go to IXL Practice P10.